so I guess we're good. Um, I'm going to allow folks to just ask questions during the presentation because I think I have more than I need, and I don't have to cover everything. So when Margot approached me for a talk around artificial intelligence, she really wanted to know about how AI can really improve our lives. And I added a subtitle to the talk because I have been thinking a lot these past few years as my lab develops new AI techniques about the digital society. So that relationship between AI and the increasingly digital society. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples that many of us know, but don't realize how pervasive they are in our everyday life. Okay, so I start first with some text to focus us and just to kind of build recognition among us that virtually every transaction that we're carrying out, whether it's a social transaction or this presentation right now, or it's a financial transaction, or it is a visit at the doctor's office with some follow-up, many of these transactions underneath, they may have very well an algorithm. They may have an AI, often an AI-powered platform that is running underneath and making decisions. Or at the very minimum, helping, for instance, doctors triage patients, prioritize patients, or is making diagnoses of specific diseases, as I will also show you. We have a lot of examples of these. We have now examples of AI techniques being used to predict recidivism rates, who should receive bail or not, that are being adopted in our court system in various states with various rules around it. We have AI techniques that employers are utilizing in order to filter candidates. We have AI techniques that are helping banks to determine who should be given a loan or not, who is a risk and who's not a risk. So there are a lot of examples of these, including most recently those that seem to have made it more out there in the public's eye, these content generation methods such as DALI, which allows you to generate images from text prompts, or as I think everybody under the sun has heard, ChatGPT and BART and other content generation, text generation techniques. I'll say a little bit more about those because those are very much in the development stage. So this will be a kind of a broad sweeping talk about AI. And I just will use throughout this talk images generated by an AI methodology by DALI, which is another sort of platform put out by OpenAI, the same platform that also put out ChatGPT, and with which my kids are having a lot of fun. You can give it text prompts and it can give you images. And at the moment, you can avoid copyright issues mainly because there's no regulatory policy. There's nobody telling you you can't use these images, but who knows, maybe in a few years, I won't be allowed to use these images in my talks. So what is AI? Just to begin with, the funny thing is that the more advanced we become in developing AI technologies, the less sure we are about what is AI. We had a very different definition of AI when I was teaching courses, even as far as 5 years back, than what we have now. So now we have this wishy-washy definition that says that we now define AI as basically the ability of computer systems and algorithms to complete tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence. So it's really not a very specific definition, but basically says that if you have a methodology that can do something typically reserved for humans or for which we typically thought you would need human intelligence, then we would say that that is an artificially intelligent methodology, right? It's intelligent, but because it's not coming from a living system, a human, it's artificial. So I wanted to give you a sense of how did we get here, what is here, and where we are heading. I will try to put a more of a spin on commerce and economy as I go along, because I guess different audiences are interested in different things. But just very quickly, how did we get here? I don't know whether you love history. As I get older, I start appreciating history more and more. I kind of hated it in high school. But where we are right now, we are at the top right of the arch, I should say, of human history. We have the fourth, it's known as the fourth industrial revolution. We started with the first industrial revolution, which used water and steam power, right, and mechanized production. So it, in some sense, it automated production, and it put a lot of humans out of those very menial jobs. And then we had the second industrial revolution, which was all about electricity and went a long way to create mass production and really supported growth of our population. And then we had the third industrial revolution as far back as the 90s, where information technology really saw a boom and went, and we had even further automation of production, and people lost a lot of jobs, and there were a lot of new jobs being created. Now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, which is really characterized by a fusion of technologies that blur the physical, the biological, and the digital worlds. Most of the time nowadays, you're spending it on your phone. And even, you know, when you're interacting, if you're interacting with a medical consultant, they may be consulting an automated system. So it's becoming harder and harder to determine what portion of your time you spent in the physical world versus the digital world. So how far back can we go? When did we see kind of, you know, these sparks of artificial intelligence? I guess it depends how far back you want to go. But for me, the first sparks go back to Aristotle, that Greek dude, as my kids say. So Aristotle was very interested in systematizing knowledge and understanding and thinking. And he thought deeply about the laws that should govern thought and how we should come up with proofs. He wrote a very interesting book, Econometry and Ethics, which many people think is the first kind of guidance or guidelines towards AI. But really what helped us was in the first industrial revolution, the standardization of a language. Colonialism went a long way because now people could have a standard language, English. The industrial revolution in England then spread into other European countries. Automation, you know, became a thing. And then I'm going to really fast forward to 1956. 1956, current era. We have at Dartmouth a brilliant group of scientists, all men, by the way, all white men at the time. And they came together and they coined the term artificial intelligence. Prior to this workshop, we did not have this term. They came together because they really wanted to advance what machines and what programming could do. So they wrote a proposal to get some money, right, to pay for their time during the summer. So they wrote, and I'm quoting here, an attempt will be made to find how to make machines use language, form abstractions and concepts, solve the kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and improve themselves. We think that a significant advance can be made if we work on it together for a summer. And they birthed the term artificial intelligence and a variety of techniques by which people were starting to improve the ability of machines and algorithms to carry out mostly games at the time and some proofs. They were interested in a lot of games. So AI was really jump-started with games. Or the first hallmark of intelligence that we have, it seems, in humanity is games, the ability to play games. And computers became better and better at playing games. In 1997, there was a very important seminal event. Kasparov was beaten. So Kasparov is this guy here. I'm pretty sure many of you have seen it. Here you cannot see him because he's quite distressed. He has put his hands over his face, but he lost to Deep Blue. There was several competitions that were played, and he realized that he was playing against a much smarter algorithm. He said, after 19 moves, basically resigning the sixth and final game after just 19 moves, he said, I lost my fighting spirit. It went a little bit deeper than that. He actually, in retrospect, started saying that I realized a different kind of intelligence. It was not like playing against humans. And even at the time, the algorithm utilized by Deep Blue was not very sophisticated compared by today's. In May, fast forward, in May 2017, we have Google AI defeating the human Go champion at a crazy difficult game, the Chinese game of Go, which is more difficult than chess because it has so many moves that one can make, so many options. So I call this sort of pun intended game over, because in basically, I would say, the second decade of our century, we have not just increasing sophistication in algorithms, but what really started to happening is we started to gather a lot of data, a lot of sensor data, whether these were sensors on buildings, on bridges, or whether these were your texts on Twitter, on Facebook, on Reddit. These were data that were now available. And at the same time, our computational infrastructure became much more powerful. Now, we had 1 trillion or 1 teraflop in our cell phones. We had a lot more computing power. So it was this confluence of increasing algorithmic sophistication, big data, and our growing ability of carrying out computations that really brought together these really amazing sophistication of AI. And at the point where now these algorithms are capable of learning without human support. For just in one example, Google's DeepMind algorithm can teach itself how to play Atari after just about 49 Atari games, and it can just play against itself. It doesn't need even a human anymore. All right, but you might think, who cares about games? Well, games are some of the most difficult platforms on which you can measure human intelligence, especially games with strategy. But from games, then we can go to personal and professional assistance, because a lot of the technologies that we put together in order for an AI system to win games now can be used to do more useful things. So here I'm showing some useful things, examples of how AI can improve our lives. Here is WaveNet. This is a platform. It's a platform that can listen for raw audio, so it can get speech, humans, and it can train itself over human sounding speech to generate realistic human sounding speech. It really reduces the gap between what we think is a computer or human speech by over 50%, and it now powers your Google Assistant if you are using it. So it really has come a long way to giving us this personal assistance. Okay, if this doesn't strike you as a particularly useful example of AI improving our lives, how about this one? We now have AI techniques that can help doctors. They can get patient symptoms and readings and test readings, and they can help doctors diagnose very bad things, such as acute kidney injury, up to 48 hours earlier than the typical method of a doctor looking at all the symptoms and coming with some decision. And with early detection, of course, you get better preventative care, you avoid invasive procedures, hopefully, and you reduce costs. We have now AI systems that can identify breast cancer, and many of those are being adopted more aggressively in Europe. In Hungary, for instance, you have these mama centers, very simple clinics where women can go do their mammogram, and there is an AI method in the background identifying abnormal readings or normal readings and suggesting them to a pathologist that then has the final decision. But they are noticing really big improvements, and they're noticing examples that pathologists might have missed, but the system catches. So there are many different ways of thinking about how we got to this kind of AI sophistication where we can have systems diagnose breast cancer or acute kidney injury and more. I'm not going to go over all that, the philosophical roadmap, simply to say that prior to 2010, we had very little data of whether that was, data from text or data from hospitals being collected and shared with computer science researchers. So we really depended on a lot of human knowledge. We could call it the pre-digital age. And then something happened around 2010. We started having some data. So we started building models, but not too sophisticated. We call them shallow models. Then after 2010, we have big data, lots of data, billions, trillions. And now we can build very sophisticated algorithms that can learn from the data, and are underneath are these sort of deep architectures that we call deep learning, which is pretty much responsible for almost all the technological breakthroughs that you read out there, including ChatGPT. So I am not going to go in detail over what distinguishes sort of sophisticated AI and more sophisticated AI, simply to say that it's a different world of learning about it. Before, we would have our own knowledge. we would make predictions, make measurements, compare how we did with measurements, and then go back and refine our knowledge. Nowadays, we don't have to do this. We don't have to be limited by human ingenuity or our disciplinary knowledge or creativity. Instead, we can capture much more complex properties about the world in a completely data-driven manner. So rather than trying to understand sort of the principles behind something, we can just gather data about a process and then leverage a more complex model to model this process. So here I'm showing, for instance, an example of a project that has been used, has been developed in my lab to recognize, for instance, very important things about DNA. We just collect a lot of DNA data and we build a model that can annotate this data and can say, okay, this piece here is a promoter, this is not a promoter, this is a gene, just basically to help us understand human biology. And there is not much human ingenuity happening here. Just there's a little bit to make up for the fact that we didn't have way too much data prior to 2010. So this is sort of AI operating in the presence of small data. There are other examples that we have developed in the lab. For instance, how to determine whether a small molecule of peptide can help us find multi-drug resistant bacteria. So these images here are of bad bacteria that you find, methicillin resistant staph, and many others that show up sometimes in hospitals or in elderly care facilities. So over the years, we have developed a lot of these techniques, whether they are to understand biology or even to detect, for instance, the condition of roads. Is this a patch? Is this a pothole? What is it? And to be able to do it from passively collected data, such as, say, from your smartphone. You just collect from certain sensors in your smartphone, or you are happily just driving around and carrying out your daily tasks. So in the presence now of a lot of data, what we're doing is we're building these types of models. And here is a very simple model that I'm showing you. So on the left here, basically, this is all the data. This can be your texts in Twitter. This can be images, photos of your family or not your family, friends, or these can be measurements from sensors that are tracking the soundness of a building. And then we're putting together these complicated engineering platforms, if you will, where we introduce new units or neurons, we make connections, we have possibly a lot of these intermediate hidden layers. And the connections here, they all have sort of numbers, values, or weights. This model makes some prediction. We compare these predictions with the real world. And depending on how much they are different, we go back and we modify the weights in sort of a sound manner, in a mathematical manner, until this model converges and is able to give us accurate predictions. And it encapsulates, in a sense, all the knowledge, implicitly, all the knowledge that we could have formed about a specific process. So these models can get very deep. They can get very complex. For instance, ChatGPT has 1 trillion models, and it has tons and tons and tons of these layers. So a lot of weights, a lot of these units. But it really is not a new invention in some sense. So in some sense, what is old becomes new. This new research that we now see everywhere, whether it is with diffusion models that are creating these beautiful fake images or fake videos or kind of new synthetic text, they all started with Frank Rosenblatt's perceptron. So this very smart guy at MIT, I believe at the time, he was thinking about what we now call deep learning. He was thinking about neural networks. So he was thinking about units that have weights, you collect them, there's a function here, and then you propagate a certain percentage of that information, and through that you get to an output, to a prediction, and if it differs very much from what you want it to be, you go back and you modify the weights until the prediction becomes better. The problem with Rosenblatt is that he was 70 years too early. It was an ingenious idea, but it didn't have enough data to really show the power of this architecture and to scale this architecture up to millions or trillions of these units. But he did, even at the time, build a system that was able to distinguish cards marked on the left from cards marked on the right, which you might think is a very simple task. This is a classic, what we call classification task, for which we started developing in AI increasingly more powerful models. It was resurrected again in the 80s, this work on neural networks. There were a lot of people that promised the military, the army, and whoever would listen that we can do amazing things. They failed because there wasn't enough data, so they were left dead again until, our century, where now we had so much data that we saw by scaling these models, we could do amazing and sometimes creepy things. So in 2012, neural network research made a comeback. And so I called it a comeback kid. I'm not sure many of you are familiar, but the one name that you may have heard a lot in the news is Geoffrey Hinton. We call him the godfather of deep learning. At Toronto, he went back to neural networks and he started scaling them up, making them really big. He was working at the time with Ilya Sutskever. Ilya Sutskever is one of the brains behind OpenAI, ChatGPT nowadays, and the graduate student that did the work was Alex Krzyzewski. The first thing that they showed is that they could build a sophisticated method that could classify images. Now, this is a task that usually requires human intelligence, right? So if I show you images, you say, this is a chair, this is an elephant, and so on. And we were having a lot of difficulty in computer vision building systems to do this. So they put together a very different system. This is shown with boxes, but inside these boxes hide those units, those neurons. So you see, this is way more complicated than Frank Rosenblatt's perceptron. I'm not going to go in detail over what these are, max pooling and so on. These are mathematical operations. But in some sense, it was the right time to do this because a very forward-thinking researcher at Stanford, she built a huge data set, ImageNet, which we still use to this day. It contained 22,000 objects, images, across, it contains, 15 million high-resolution images that were labeled, annotated painstakingly by graduate students and undergraduate students with what it is that they were, chair or table or house. And it was over these 15 million images that the Hinton well, it was called AlexNet because of the graduate student that AlexNet was trained for, and it was shown to really compete with human performance. So here we have the very first example of a sophisticated AI technology powered by deep learning that reached what we called was a level of human intelligence. And these systems then were starting to be developed beyond computer vision in bioinformatics, as I showed some examples in my lab, natural language processing. So for instance, text generation, image generation, question and answering. And basically since then, these architectures have completely dominated AI research. And so if you hear anything in the data about an AI methodology, it's probably powered by a deep neural network underneath. So we started to be able to learn from data. The system started learning from themselves, playing against themselves, and they were able to do it from lots of data or even from little data. They can assist us now to design a bridge, given designs, cost, material constraints. They can help us to best allocate governmental resources over a population, energy, power grids, make decisions about those. And as I said, even make decisions who is at flight risk or not, who's a better candidate for the job. They can learn hidden patterns in data without human supervision. They can forecast things, events in the future. They can even learn how to make better decisions with occasional human input in cases where there's not that much data. So what is here? Let me give you some examples. I don't think this video will work. Will it now? Let me see. Can you hear anything? Perfect. I'm going to let it play a little bit. Okay, so let's make it a little bit interactive. What strikes you about this? Don't be shy.
It's pretty amazing how many things they can do, and the water, I mean, they're rain repellent and they're strong, and they don't talk back to you as employees, I guess. I don't know.
They absolutely could. With ChatGPT, they could, but they were not designed to talk to you yet. But they could. You could have a dog that now talks to you, a mechanical dog. Anything else? What strikes other people?
Creeps me out a little bit, giving me
Yeah.
Terminator vibes.
It does have a Terminator vibe, right? Imagine having a gun on top of this, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So this is an engineering feat because, you know, it has swappable battery. For many years, these things were tethered in the lab with huge cords because we hadn't figured out how to give them enough juice, enough power, so we could actually operate them outside for a long amount of time. It's an amazing mechanical engineer feat, so there have had to be a lot of developments in mechanical engineering, but there are very sophisticated algorithms running inside these things. The ability to walk in unstructured terrains, to go up and down those what look like a mess, a pile of things. That's very important. So they're trying to make a point that you can use these in search and rescue, right? They can get into spaces that may be scary for humans. They can have a camera, they can tell us where, let's say, earthquake survivors may be. They have a manipulation. They can open doors. This was very difficult for robotics research for many, many years. And they can be imbued with behaviors to make us feel a little bit safe, like when it shakes itself from the rain. It totally doesn't need to do that. It's just a behavior added to make it feel more like a dog. So it's a confluence of a lot of technologies that has come to this point. It's developments in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, not just AI. So it's very important to make this point because this is what we call an embodied AI. So it's AI with a body. So disembodied AI, so AI technologies that don't have a body, are also just as amazing, but you know, you don't have a cool YouTube video for it. But here, for instance, since 2020, we don't want to think too much about 2020, but when we were in the height of the pandemic, there were a lot of labs that started to design AI techniques that could, based on images of your lungs, determine whether you had pneumonia and whether it looked like COVID pneumonia or not. And both the NIH and the NSF, where I served for several years, gave a lot of money to researchers. I ran, when I was at NSF, the COVID rapid response team. We give a lot of money to researchers to develop specifically the kinds of AI technologies that could assist with making diagnosis fast, or even could understand which patient was at a higher risk or not. We now have AI technologies to really design potential drug candidates in a computational lab inside the machine. So no pirouettes needed. So we can synthetically design small molecules that can potentially be drug candidates. We have generative systems, kind of like ChatGPT, but they don't generate text, they generate molecules. They learn over millions of collected molecules to generate new ones. And this is very active research in my lab at the moment. We have beautiful examples out there. Google is amazing at PR. They're way better than I am. So for instance, they PR'd the heck out of their AlphaFold system. I don't know, I hope some of you have read about it. It was a new deep learning system that gave a solution to a 50-year-old grand challenge in biology. It helped us to see what is the three-dimensional shape of protein molecules, what we call protein structure prediction. We're using AI, I mentioned briefly, for traffic prediction. So for instance, we obtained from the Virginia Department of Transportation speed data, historical speed data collected over 12 months time frame in 2019 from 131 road segments here around Virginia, primarily Northern Virginia, Fairfax Corner. We were given where work zones were. You all know there's construction all the time around here. It's really frustrating. So we built together an AI, me and my student, we built a deep learning network that could take into account the road network, could take into account where the work zones were, and could take into account the historical speed data and make predictions about what the speed will be 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, plus 90 plus minutes in the future. And these systems currently are good at about 30-minute window in the future. They can make correct predictions, but their behavior starts deteriorating 60 minutes plus in the future. We're using AI for mental health, so we can analyze, for instance, text in social media, Twitter or Facebook. We can build these language-based models like ChatGPT, but we can also train them to tell us whether there are contents in the text indicative of mental health issues, such as suicidal thoughts or social anxiety or loneliness and so on. So it is a soft monitoring technique in some sense. We're increasingly building more sophisticated language technology. So the ChatGPT that you all have heard about, that's an example of a language technology. What is interesting to me is that when I first put this slide out, ChatGPT was not out yet. But because some of the work my lab does is in developing models like ChatGPT, I thought at the time that language is the next AI frontier, that if you master language, then you go a long way towards telling folks that AI is reaching human intelligence, because we explicitly connect language with human intelligence, right? No other species has that ability, or at least not as sophisticated. So now you have chatbots that let you talk to historical figures. You can simulate, you can say, how would Einstein interact with Mozart, or answer to me this question, but in the style of Mozart or in the style of Einstein. We can generate code, programming code. Our students are using it to cheat in their homeworks. Folks are using it to answer medical queries, which they shouldn't, because these systems can just make stuff up and you can sue them. You can style transfer. You can say, hey, here's what I want to write in plain pidgin English. Can you do it in legalese? And then maybe save me some hours and some money. I don't have to go to a lawyer. You can use it to assist with creative writing. You can do autocomplete from text to images, so you can give text and it can generate images. It can even explain jokes, which we say is a hallmark of human intelligence. And here is an example. This is not ChatGPT, it's a Google model PaLM, and you can say, explain this joke, and it can give you a joke, and the model response is pretty good. I would not have done a better job, but this is not consistent. Jokes still remain a challenge for language models. You can use these language models to understand and predict AI national policies. This is a project I'm running with folks in the Schar School of Policy. So the point I want to make is that we have increasing sophistication, and we're using these systems, we're giving them the power to make decisions, but we're starting to ask some questions, whether there is bias, harmless or harmful bias. How many people ever heard of the White Obama? Okay, maybe not, because this was not like such a huge issue, I guess, for most people. But what some researchers noticed is that when they were putting together a system to depixelate an image, so you can give an image that is really bad quality and you can say, can you clean this up? The AI system would do it. But when you'd give it a picture of pixelated Obama, it would give you the face of a white person, like consistently, over and over. And the reason is that there were not many examples of African-American images over which the model was trained. It was trained primarily over white people. And so the model basically illustrates the biases that it has in the data and the output that it gives. And you might think, okay, it's kind of silly. I'm sure Obama was maybe insulted, but it's not like a big deal. Well, the big deal is that it tells us that if there is some bias in the data, the system can propagate that bias, that can even systematize that bias if you use it for decision making. And so indeed, if you use systems to deny you credit, you have to be worried whether there is some inherent bias. Or if you're using these systems to filter out candidates for recruiting, you might be worried about bias. And if you're using these systems to make decisions about who should get bail or not, you might be worried about bias. And there are also other concerns about these systems that, they're increasingly disconnecting us where they promise connectivity. So there are some issues, some very interesting issues that are emerging. I'm not going to be able to speak to all of them because I want to move fast, but there are folks that say AI technologies are great because they are equalizers at a scale, right? I don't have to talk to a human who may be biased against me. Problem is that AI can also be an inequalizer at scale if there is an inherent bias. So for instance, if there is some bias in the data and the system makes sort of discriminates against certain groups of people in terms of who gets loans or not, this is a problem because you may first not be aware of it, and second, it's a problem because you don't know who to sue. Deciding who gets bail, that has been also a really controversial topic. New Jersey adopted one of these systems. They're called algorithmic risk assessment in 2014, but then they dropped it because they found that it was perpetuating racial inequities. There was a very interesting study that was done. Deciding who gets the job. Amazon is kind of the prime example of this. They were using a system that they have developed in-house, and by 2015 they realized that their AI system, a deep learning system, was really not allowing them to hire women. It was discriminating against women, and it was reading certain things. When it was seeing things such as women, chess, it was removing those applications. It confirmed that the new recruitment engine did not like women and scrapped the system. And part of it is because it was trained on successful applications. So applications of folks that had been hired, which was predominantly for the software engineering jobs, men. So the system didn't know how to read resumes of women. But despite all these biases and issues that we are finding out, companies are not stopping. And startups are not stopping. They are realizing that this is a technology that can allow me to be creative, to have a jump start, to create even my own niche thing and market. And so there's a lot of activity. Canada, China, US are the three top countries. These statistics may be a little bit old, but I think as of 2020, of the top 100 AI startups, 65% were in the US. Lots of work is also happening in the United Kingdom, I should add. So where are we heading? There are a lot of things that make people excited. So for instance, AI and machine learning, the whole thing about learning from data, we call that machine learning, will transform the scientific method, the way that we carry out experiments and what we can and we cannot do. But AI will also become a pillar of foreign policy because AI now can be used to fight, right? It can be used to make decisions, so it cannot be ignored as a strategy at the highest level. It will enable next generation consumer experiences. We've already started to see this with ChatGPT. Branding and marketing is being done very differently. It potentially may address the climate crisis. There are some examples of these because it has the ability to consider a lot of data and bring you some interesting conclusions about what is happening. Mostly though, we are in narrow AI. So we're developing specific systems for specific problems in some very narrowly defined tasks, but not quite in general AI, which is basically what people do. We are good at a lot of things. We carry out a lot of tasks. So in general AI, you don't focus on just a single cognitive ability, but on many of those. And there's a lot of work happening in the research community on how to move towards general AI. I'm going to skip that in the interest of time and go to the what could go wrong. Deepfakes. We've all seen deepfakes. So fake images of people, fake videos of people, right? There was the Pope in Bala something, like a very weird puffy white jacket. I don't know if people saw that a couple of weeks ago, right? And that's kind of haha funny. But what's not haha funny is that now it's kind of difficult to determine whether an image or a video is fake. And I just read an article yesterday that defendants in courts are saying, well, that video is doctored, it's fake, it's not a video of me. They're using this argument these days. AI predicting people's behaviors. There are companies that are using it to monitor productivity, but also companies that want to monitor just, from people walking who these people are. So facial recognition on steroids. There was a big article about an American professor in some deep trouble who was using these techniques to assist China with the surveillance system that they thought was kind of kosher, but then we realized, well, China wanted it to really track their Uyghur population. AI for democratization of science. People are very excited. Yeah, AI can be used to generate molecules, new drugs. That's great. But also it can be used to generate bioweapons. There was an article, they did this experiment and they said in a very short amount of time, it gave them any different bioweapons, like 6 hours, like dangerous chemical compounds. Sophisticated language technologies. There may be some negative broader impacts we can see and some we cannot see. What we can see, for instance, students cheating. Okay, they can cheat from ChatGPT in their homeworks, coding, or writing an essay, but there may be others that we cannot see. So if we use these technologies, for instance, there's mediators between how information reaches humans. You might wonder what you may be missing. Has anybody played with ChatGPT? No? Oh, you should.
Yes. Oops. Where did I go?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, I use it all the time and I'm disgusted by it, but I use it all the time. But one thing that folks don't realize is that it's very interesting because it's a new way to collect information. With Google search, you put some keywords and you get a list of web pages, hopefully relevant, but then the burden of synthesizing that information is on you. You go and you hunt, right? You go and you look at those websites and you collect that information. You are active in the process. With ChatGPT, you are passive. So ChatGPT has collected that information, has processed it, has made connections, and it gives you a summary of that, but you are just passive. You're sitting and receiving it. And if you want to ask the questions, well, why are you saying this? What is the evidence for this? It's not very good right now. You can make stuff up. Like it showed me that I'm an IEEE fellow. I would love to be an IEEE fellow, but I am not an IEEE fellow, but it will say things and it will say things so articulately and eloquently that, it can't be wrong. It speaks better than me and it writes better than me. But in any case, there are some fundamental questions to ask about how these technologies can affect policymakers, how these technologies can affect children or vulnerable populations, and could they be misused, for instance, to erode trust in information, right? To accept that, oh, this information for sure is fake. You cannot trust anything nowadays, right? And trust in institutions, or to carry out fraud at scale. Okay, so somebody said that spot thing is creepy. So I have some examples of these. Israel just deployed an AI-powered tourniquet. There was a big one where some Iranian scientist was killed, and there was really nobody there to kill that scientist. So they have deployed AI. AI now is in the front lines. China has a very aggressive AI national policy plan with very specific things they want to go after and very specific things they want to use in order to strengthen their military capabilities. Here is an example. It looks like Spot, but it has been fitted to have a gun and look Spot. This image doesn't work because I downloaded it from a site and then they took it down after it and I couldn't go back. But it's a drone that is dropping the Spot dog that has on top of it a gun. Okay, I'm not going to say much more of that. That's creepy. Okay, but we have to think about, we're using AI for surveillance, we're using AI for policy, we're using AI even to come up with national security, we're using AI for warfare, cyber defense, missile defense. We could be using it for a lot more. We're just limited by human imagination. And I don't mean that as endorsing it. I'm just saying that human imagination is currently the only limit for what we can use AI. And there are a lot of people asking whether an AI technocracy is emerging among the big tech, because the work that we now carry in academia, we don't have the computational resources that the big tech has, so they get to make a lot of decisions. Certainly OpenAI completely changed the conversation. There are folks like Kissinger and Schmidt that are trying to get us to think about AI. There were people that came together, some hypocritical people like Elon Musk saying we need to put the brakes on AI. And then after that, he said, I want to do true ChatGPT, whatever that means. But the point is that we're now starting to ask a lot of questions, because what we're realizing is that these are very rapidly developing technologies. We're not ready for them. We can't even anticipate all the bad ways, but even the good ways in which they may be used. The government is trying to get on top of it. They're coming with some policy recommendations for how we should treat AI, safe and effective systems. They're saying you have the option to talk to a human rather than, engage with the system if you so choose. But whatever stuff is coming from the government is really toothless because these are all non-binding. They have no power over the large tech companies. There was just a meeting, what was it, yesterday or 2 days ago, where they invited OpenAI and other guys. And it was kind of like, hey guys, like try not to do too many bad things. And they said, okay. And then they left. Basically nothing. Okay, I wanted to talk about ChatGPT a little bit because I realize this is Chamber of Commerce. So many of you may be very interested in what AI techniques can help you to do. And here at Mason, we are starting to think about how we can help businesses to capitalize on AI innovation. Some of these you may want to think about the new generative AI economy. There will be huge disruptions in labor markets. So for instance, these are the Hollywood writers on strike. If you've been reading very closely, they don't want to be replaced by AI technologies. At the core of the fight is that they do not want to be replaced, and they also do not want the companies to use their writing in order to train a new AI system to build digital twins or data twins of the writers and then fire the writers. Right? If you learn kind of the style in which the writers write, and then you ask ChatGPT or a version of it, it can write a story. I don't need the writer anymore. The writers are saying that's not creativity, but that's at the center of their strike. And the companies will not commit not to using AI because they say, well, these techniques will become more and more powerful, and we cannot just say no to an emerging technology. Already companies are making plans. IBM will replace about 8,000 jobs with AI over time. And they also don't want to hire aggressively because they keep waiting for these technologies. They know these technologies will become more and more sophisticated. So they don't want to rush and get people in those jobs for which maybe they can offload them to AI systems. Kind of some growing pains. This is an example of Getty suing an AI art generator, Stable Diffusion, for copyright infringement because Getty says you never asked us for permission to use our images over which you trained your system so that now you can generate these new images for people over prompts. And this is an example of complete lack of regulatory space. Like we were not prepared for this. We don't know how to answer this. There's a huge niche market being created, what we call AI whisperers or AI prompters. It's a niche AI job in the market. Basically, they're not asking for computer scientists, they're asking for people that know how to get the best output from systems such as ChatGPT that have gotten experience and know what are the best prompts and can share these best practices with the company. Here, I said jobs near Fairfax, Virginia for AI prompter, and I found several of those. Upwork is one of those that is really trying to get AI engineer, AI prompter, and we were specifically ChatGPT 4 prompter. So they want people. This is a new kind of job that has not been there before. Of course, the question is whether these new jobs will offset the jobs that white collar folks will lose from these. All right, so what to expect very quickly, I'd say lots of creativity, gold rush. There's an incentive to be first to market. What can I use this for? To do something that my competitors couldn't, broaden my base or create a niche base for it. Lots of experimentation of new technologies. There are lots of startups that are starting. They are more ready to experiment than big tech because they are operating in a space that really there's not much regulation. So they're going after, could you do this and could you do that? And not so worried. They don't have sort of the more conservative approach as Google, which is the reason why Google really got outsmarted by OpenAI. But it is a nightmare, a regulatory nightmare, because in absence of regulatory policies, it's even unclear what to regulate. Because we don't know what we cannot foresee, what you can do with these technologies. The moment people are saying, no, I can do this, they're like, okay, maybe that's bad. Maybe we shouldn't do that. But we're really playing catch up. There will be big shifts in the labor market exclusively for white collar jobs. Accountants, administrators, writers, people that were trained for information technology for the third industrial revolution, many of them will be displaced by the fourth industrial revolution, but hopefully there will be new labor markets created. Huge changes in education. We're not prepared for it, but we have to give new degrees, certificates. We have to train AI prompters, which we never thought we had to do. Badges, 4-year, 2-year, 1 year, 6 months, so that you can quickly go into a niche market that may be just starting, maybe just coming together. And I'm going to stop here. I think I hope I covered a lot.